Welcome, everybody. I suggest we get started. So please settle into your seats. Distinguished Enderlein Fellows, dear John Morijn, dear Besa Shahini, dear Johannes Lindner, dear Magdalena Kirchner, and friends of the MacArthur Foundation, dear faculty, staff, guests, students, friends of the Hertie School, and most importantly, dear Isabel, on behalf of the Henrik's family. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all here at the Hertie School on this special evening, which is co-hosted by our Jacques Delors Center and our Center for Fundamental Rights. Today, we are welcoming our third Henrik Enderlein Fellow, John Morijn, Professor of Law and Politics and International Relations at the University of Groningen. How's my Dutch? John, it is wonderful to have you join the ranks of the Henrik Enderlein Fellows. We're very much looking forward to hearing your take on the rule of law within the European Union when it comes to the question of European integration in your key remarks and in the discussion later. The torch will be passed to you by our previous Enderlein Fellow and former Minister for Education, Youth and Sports of Albania, Besa Shahini. This side. We are very curious to hear about the project you have led on EU enlargement of the EU enlargement process to the Western Balkans during your stay at the Jacques Delors Center. This evening is not only about celebrating and learning from our outstanding policy practitioners and scholars. It is also about honoring the legacy and cherishing the memory of our dear colleague, mentor, friend, father, and husband, Henrik Enderlein, on the eve of what would have been his 50th birthday. As a leader, Henrik never shied away from transformative changes and inspired many through his strong sense of purpose and commitment to preparing young talents for shaping our collective future. As a scholar, he was a thought leader on European integration and economic policy, whose work was characterized by intellectual rigor, analytical sharpness, and relevance to real-world problems. As a person, he infected those around him with his positive outlook on life, his dynamic demeanor, and his enthusiasm for the European project. I would like to invite you to take a moment to honor his memory and silently think of him and those who are missing him most tonight. Henrik was a true visionary. His impact on our community and on European political and economic thought continues to resonate profoundly. I'm delighted to announce that in order to facilitate and honor his ideals, we have just established the Henrik Enderlein Fund, which supports the ongoing mission of the Jacques Delors Center through scholarships to exceptional students, researchers, and policymakers. The fund plays a crucial role in academic excellence in supporting the next generation of great European minds. These objectives are very dear to Henrik's heart, and he dedicated his life's work to them. If you would like to make a donation so we can continue his effort, you can do so by scanning the QR code you find here or on the doors, or you can simply go on our website, Google Henrik Enderlein Fund, and find out more. And we're very thankful for your help in supporting the ideals that Henrik has fought for. Henrik was not only a tireless supporter of the European idea and European integration, but also an advocate for research at the service of society with the potential for transformative impact on policy making. He was someone who was dedicated to building networks and bridges across borders and across sectors. In that spirit, the Henrik Enderlein Fellowship offers exceptional researchers and policymakers an opportunity to conduct research at the Hertie School for up to 9 months. To be considered, the researcher must be dedicated to promoting exchange between policymakers and academics and tackling the most pressing challenges facing Germany and Europe today. In addition to connecting with our world-class researchers at the Hertie School Center of Competence and at the Hertie School at large, the Enderlein Fellowship holder also participates in teaching, which allows him or her to help shape the future policymakers in Europe and beyond. None of this would be possible without our partners at Stiftung Mercator, a strong advocate for a society based on solidarity and participation. Through numerous projects, Stiftung Mercator works tirelessly to strengthen democracy and the rule of law in Europe, addressing the impact of digitization on democracy and society, and drive forward climate change mitigation. I would like to thank Stiftung Mercator and their Director, Center for Europe in the World, Magdalena Kirchner, who is here with us today, for their generous support for this important initiative honoring Henrik's legacy. This is the third year in a row that Mercator supported us in welcoming outstanding scholars and policy practitioners to our Hertie community. In 2022, our first Henrik Enderlein Fellow ever, Johannes Lindner, joined the Hertie School. In addition to his research and teaching, Johannes took up the co-directorship of the Jacques Delors Center, leading the center's think tank activities with the drive and enthusiasm he shares with Henrik. Johannes, thank you very much for all your work since joining us in these past 2 years. Last year, we welcomed our very own Master of Public Policy alumna, Besa Shahini, back into our midst. Besa was a student of Henrik's and shares his vision of a stronger and more united Europe that can welcome those who want to join the Union. During this past year, she was able to offer new perspectives on policy change, the process of enlargement, and the Western Balkans to students and scholars alike. Besa, we're very curious to hear about the insights you have gained during your experience at the Jacques Delors Center, but I can already tell you that you broadened our understanding of the areas you work on the scholarly side, of course, but also from the students who are very happy to have you be so available to teach them all you know. So thank you very much on behalf of our students. Now we're very excited to welcome a distinguished legal scholar and policymaker who is incredibly experienced in working at the intersection of academia and civil service as our third Henrik Enderlein Fellow. John Morijn joins us after a fellowship in law and public policy at Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. He holds a chair in law and politics and international relations and an assistant professorship of European human rights law at the University of Groningen. John also serves as chair of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency's Scientific Committee. Over the span of his impressive career, he has held multiple positions in academia, government, and independent advisory bodies. John has received law degrees from institutions in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Italy, and holds a PhD in law from the European University Institute in Florence. During his time at the Hertie School, John will also serve as a visiting professor in international law and is already very much tied up in teaching. Affiliated with our Center for Fundamental Rights, he will teach in the graduate programs, but also in the Starlight program that trains legal practitioners in the EU to apply the Charter of Fundamental Rights in strategic litigation, coordinated by our Executive Education Department. What John shares with Henrik is his devotion to examining and promoting European values in policymaking while asking pressing questions about the concept of democracy. John, we're so happy to have you with us, not only because our colleagues, students, and guests can learn from your vast experience as a globetrotter and on the topics that you study, but also because your main research question of what democracy means in EU law and policy and what it should mean could not be more relevant and timely. I'm sure that over the course of your Henrik Enderlein Fellowship, you will have many bright thoughts and interesting questions. And to help you never forget any of them, we want to give you a small token, a gift that Henrik Enderlein Fellows get, and it's a notebook. This notebook is a tribute to Henrik, who was never without a notebook to ensure that he never lost any of his ideas. And the people who know him will remember that sometimes he pulls it out and he jots things down. He always had a pen with him as well. And so we want to make sure that every Henrik Enderlein Fellow gets a notebook, so nothing is lost. Besa had received hers during her inauguration. I will give you yours in just a second, but we realized we missed a Henrik Enderlein Fellow because Johannes was part of those that had the idea that we should hand out a notebook. So I have 2 notebooks to hand out, one to John and one to Johannes after I leave the stage so that both of you have the same token. I would like to thank everyone again for joining us this evening, which is both a tribute to Henrik Enderlein's legacy and a forward-looking discussion on the future of Europe. And I'm sure everyone is very much looking forward to it. After we hear Besa's and John's opening remarks, we will be joined on stage by Franziska Brantner, who is the Parliamentary State Secretary at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, a Green Party spokesperson on European affairs as well. Franziska and Henrik have talked a lot of projects through together. They share a vision for a more integrated Europe, which Franziska has helped advance both in the European Parliament and now in the Bundestag and as Parliamentary State Secretary. I will thank Franziska for being here when she makes it into the room, but I'm very happy that she will be part of our panel discussion, which is moderated by Thu Nguyen, who is the Deputy Director of the Jacques Delors Center. And thank you both for participating as well. However, before we hear from John and Besa, I will give the floor to our funder from the Stiftung Mercator, without we would not be here today, and welcome Magdalena Kirchner to the stage right after I hand the notebooks to our Enderlein Fellows. I will say the floor is yours. I'll just go to my bag, which is there, give the notebooks, and then call you on stage. Thank you. And I'll invite you up for stage. Thank you.
Okay. Dear Professor Wall, State Secretary Brantner, Ms. Enderlein, distinguished guests, and especially also to the faculty, friends, colleagues of the Hertie School. On behalf of Stiftung Mercator, I'm also welcoming you, but I also want to thank you. Your presence today honors not only the legacy of Henrik Enderlein, but it also reassures us about the future of Europe, a cause that he was deeply passionate about and we might be concerned in these days. At Stiftung Mercator, we commemorate Henrik Enderlein as an inspirational, a trusted, a highly respected friend, a partner and the champion of our shared values. Because of this, we also take great pride in cooperating with the Hertie School on this distinguished fellowship, which was established in 2022. Thank you, Professor Wall, on behalf of also all my colleagues, for your trust and for allowing us to be part in this unique program. In recent years, the Henrik Enderlein Fellows have enriched the Hertie School academically, and they have contributed significantly to public discourse in Berlin and wider Europe. In a true win-win situation, however, we at Stiftung Mercator have also benefited tremendously from them as a dialogue and sparring partner for our own strategic reflections, particularly on integration and the rule of law, core themes for our own current and forthcoming work on the future of Europe. As we bid her farewell today as a fellow, I would like to give a special thanks to Besa Shahini. Her research on EU enlargement, on accession, and the need for a revitalized conversation and new approaches inspired us. And it helped us to stay the course and navigate between a geopolitical momentum and a story of distrust and fatigue of enlargement. So for not only not being cynical, I think about the future of Europe, I am also very impressed and inspired by her ability to build in very short time an incredible amount of relationships in our own civil society network all over Europe. She was always willing to share her experience with the next generation of scholars and practitioners, and eager to learn from personal encounters, which is for our approach as a foundation at the very core. Thank you, Besa, for your fantastic work and for becoming part of our community. Before I now give the floor to you, allow me also on behalf of Stiftung Mercator to welcome Professor Jean Morijn, the incoming Enderlein Fellow. He is, as we heard, a distinguished academic and practitioner, and he's dedicated to international human rights law and protection, especially in Europe. But his guiding question, what does democracy mean in European Union law and policy, and what should it mean, is not only a research question. It is an appeal to all of us. These turbulent times urge us to reflect on how to preserve, reform, and rebuild the Europe that Henrik Enderlein envisioned. Professor Morijn, we eagerly anticipate your insights and contributions to our endeavor. Above all, I wish you great success in the coming months and look forward to a really fruitful cooperation. Thank you all for being here today, for your continued commitment to the values and visions that Henrik Enderlein championed. Together, let us strive to build a stronger and more united Europe. Thank you. Besa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Magdalena, for your kind words. Thank you, Cornelia, for introducing me so kindly as well. I have spent the past year as a Henrik Enderlein Fellow here at the Hertie School with the Jacques Delors Center colleagues, looking specifically at the EU enlargement process to the Western Balkans. I look at this issue for two reasons. I mean, I chose this topic because enlargement has been brought back to the agenda. Unfortunately, for the reasons of the war of aggression that Russia has conducted in Ukraine and the response that the EU had to this action. But enlargement is back, and it was important to look at what has happened in the Western Balkans in the past 20 years since enlargement was promised as something that the Western Balkans would be part of. And second reason why I look at this issue is because it is essential for the transformation and the reform process that happens in all of the countries that have joined the European Union in the past, but also striving to join the EU in the future. And I did, as any researcher does when you start a topic, you read and listen to everything that is published recently, which last year was a lot, because 2023 marked the 20-year anniversary of this Thessaloniki summit. It was a time of optimism where it was clear that you had 10 new members joining the EU, and then it turned out to be 12. So just before 2004, before the new wave of enlargement, where the Western Balkans was promised that it would join the EU, and the reforms that began to take place took place under this umbrella. Now, the Western Balkans is a small region comprised of 6 countries. It's about 17 million people, war-torn, transitioned from communism, and there is a large economic gap with the EU, even though it's surrounded fully by the EU. The GDP per capita in the Western Balkans, on average, is about 40% of the average GDP per capita in the EU. It is striking when you compare to the growth and economic development that has happened in countries that have joined the EU in 2004 and 2007, and then Croatia in 2013. Countries like Estonia, Czechia, Slovenia have actually overcome output per capita of some of the older EU members. And it is, for many factors, but the framework that enabled this to happen was the EU accession process, which led to reforms and strengthening institutions in these countries, but then also integration into the EU, which enabled these countries to do two things: to get some of the assistance that the EU gives to new members, especially if there's a discrepancy in sort of the economic growth and development with the existing members, but also the signal that was sent to private investors that these are countries that have stable institutions, are reforming, and are joining the single market. So these countries then also got a lot of foreign direct investment, which helped with growth and development. Now, EU accession is essential for the kind of reforms that I want to see in the Western Balkans, but also for growth and development that must happen in order for the region to catch up with the EU. In order for enlargement to actually take place, what needs to, and one of the Copenhagen criteria, some of the key criteria to allow for the EU to expand, is that the EU must be ready as well. You know, this absorption capacity has to be there. The past few years actually saw a lot of recommendations as to how the EU can do this, including papers published by the European Commission as well, the outgoing European Commission. One of the proposals out there is to perhaps ease up on the way that the European Union takes decisions on many policies, but specifically on enlargement. This has been a big issue for the Western Balkans, where member states, for bilateral issues that don't necessarily have to do much with enlargement process, have blocked countries. North Macedonia was a front runner from all the Western Balkan countries in their path towards the EU, but then it was blocked by Greece because of the name, and then when the name issue got solved, France and the Netherlands put the brakes on because they wanted to revive the whole, to revise the whole enlargement process, and now they have an issue with Bulgaria over the Bulgarian minority in Macedonia, which, you know, could be a legitimate issue, but it doesn't have to stop Macedonia in its first step, which is to actually start negotiating on EU accession, considering that there has been a decision in place that Macedonia is ready to negotiate. What has happened in the Western Balkans does have implications for Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. This is why it is important to look at this process, how long it has taken, where the challenges are, and what can be done. Now, unfortunately, I don't think there is appetite for enlargement as it happened in 2004 or 2007 or even Croatia. So I don't think when we're looking at enlargement, in the next wave of enlargement, I don't think we're looking at full membership anymore. There have been proposals put out there, which I will not do justice here in my remarks, but gradual integration or multi-speed integration or joining the single market only, which basically means that what the EU is offering the new countries that are the candidate countries is perhaps integrating on economic terms, integrating into the market, but not necessarily full membership. It's being discussed as a first step towards full membership, but the fear is that could be the only step. It's not nothing. It's problematic for a poor region like in the Western Balkans because it could potentially lead to a greater trade deficit if you join a single market with a kind of economic power that exists in the Western Balkans. That's for one, and we know this because with the different trade agreements that are signed individually between the countries of the Western Balkans and the EU, trade has increased. It's just that the trade deficit has also increased together with the trade. And second, joining the single market means also free movement of labor, right? So the fear is that more people will leave the Western Balkans, come work here, and that would not necessarily help the development of the region. Now, if this is not matched with access to more EU funding, I think that joining the single market only will be problematic for the Western Balkans. Currently, there is a plan in place, it's called the Growth Plan, that is helping the countries of the Western Balkans prepare for a potential joining of the single market. However, it's very little money. So if Estonia got sort of the equivalent of 4% of its GDP after it's joined the EU, what the growth plan is offering the countries of the Western Balkans is the equivalent of 0.3% of their GDP to help with the reforms and with the economic aspects of sort of joining the single market. So perhaps this could be a way forward, but it has to be looked at in a lot more detail. It has to offer more access to the budget. And most importantly, it has to bring credibility back into the process. And what that means is actually opening up accession talks with all of the Western Balkan countries on all chapters at the same time. There's no reason to delay anymore. now is the time to really bring credibility to the process, and then hope that with this credibility then comes also an impetus for reform, and things can get a bit more back on track. This doesn't mean reduce conditionality. It just means being strict and fair in looking at how the countries are meeting the conditions while actually helping them meet these conditions. It's been now 15 years since I graduated, since I received my master's in public policy. And since then, I've been hosted by the Hertie School in many different forms. I gave speeches, I taught classes, I've been working with the executive education team on a few projects. And I'm very, very happy that I was able to come back again, and this time as a fellow, do this research and work with colleagues at the Jacques Delors Center. So thank you very much for hosting me. This was a great year professionally, and I really enjoyed doing this research and participating in all the different events that this enabled me. And it was especially, I was especially proud, actually, that the fellowship held the name of Henrik Enderlein. So for a full year, I was a Henrik Enderlein Fellow. And wherever I went, in conferences in Brussels and in Berlin, and meeting people from different capitals, people knew Henrik Enderlein, and they all sort of approached me and they said something about Henrik, which was, it was great to be able to represent him for this year. He was my favorite professor, and the reason for it was because he actually understood who were the students that he was teaching, that they would be in some form or shape contributing to the public policy in their countries or in Germany. So he tried to make things very relevant to the policymaking process today, right? And so all the theory he taught, it was always coupled with some practical examples, but also just giving access to all the networks that he had. And I hope, actually, I think I know that he would agree with my sort of conclusion and recommendation that in order for building a stronger Europe, we have to be able to be in a place where Europe can expand in a safe way that takes care of its people, but also takes care of the neighborhood. I want to thank Stiftung Mercator. Without your generous support, I wouldn't be able to do this research and do this work. And actually, I want to invite you all to listen to this short podcast that I produced as a part of my work here. It's an 8-part series. It's actually very good, and it's less to do with my work, and it's more to do with the people that I've interviewed. I've interviewed colleagues from the Jacques Delors, I've interviewed people from other think tanks, but mainly it's scholars from the region who are now teaching or working in the different member states in the EU, who can bridge this story between the Western Balkans and the EU and why this relationship is necessary for both sides. Now I am very happy to pass the fellowship and the floor to my colleague, John Morijn. I wish you all the best, and I hope you have as fruitful and as successful year as I have. Thank you.
So thank you very much for this extremely warm welcome. Before I get into the meat of my own brief talk, I want to say something about this fellowship. It's a privilege to be associated with this marvelous school and start work in this incredibly important country neighboring my brother smaller own. It's also humbling to follow in the footsteps of Johannes and Besa. But what is truly special is to be taking a position named after Henrik Enderlein, whom I know holds an extraordinary place here, both as a former president, founding director of the Jacques Delors Center, but also as a professor, mentor, and friend. I never met Professor Enderlein, but I read some of his work and talked to people who worked with him. It's rare to meet such affection and awe for someone, not just for what he has achieved in his far too short life, but more importantly, for how he did it. Leaders first listen, then act, but they don't wait to act until everybody is on board. For most of us, what is evident only shows up in the rearview mirror. Far fewer not only know where to go, but also how to get there and take others with them. Henrik did just that, and I know he is missed. I aim to honor his legacy for bridging practice in academia and bringing research outside of the confines of the ivory tower. My own experiences as a civil servant, diplomat, equality judge, Army Reserve officer, consultant, NGO founder and collaborator, as well as scholar and educator in the area of the rule of law and democracy protection, have taught me that practice makes you a better and more relevant teacher, just as keeping up with the latest research makes you more valuable in practice. It's easy to agree to this in theory, but much more difficult to truly tease this out. Not just because each day sadly only has 24 hours, often you are regarded with some suspicion on either side of practice and scholarship when active in both. Yet Hertie, based on Henrik's vision, is built around the premise that these are deeply linked. Thanks to the generous support of the Stichting Mercator, I will carry forward his wisdom and use it in the public interest, standing on the shoulders of this remarkable European. Now let me make a few introductory remarks about today's topic, EU enlargement. One is about EU rule of law protection and the other about EU democracy. How do we strengthen the rule of law when integrating new members? The usual way to discuss this is by contrasting widening and deepening. Can we become a bigger club in the current construction, or do we first need to have more solid rule of law protection rules? In that way, it effectively becomes a debate about sequencing. From a rule of law protection viewpoint, and this is my argument, this is unhelpful for three reasons. First, it assumes that deepening rule of law protection is yet to happen. In reality, over the last 5 years, it was dramatically strengthened by creating so-called budgetary conditionality, which has very strong German DNA. If member states violate some key concepts like non-corruption, prosecutorial freedom, and judicial independence in a way that makes EU funds an unsafe investment, this can have financial consequences. And it has. Almost 130 billion euros were suspended for Poland, 30 for Hungary. This was the first time these governments started changing things, proving the potential of the new tool. These rules will also apply when new states join the club. Rule of law deepening is already happening. Second, widening versus deepening assumes that we need even further rule of law rules, which in turn assumes that the recently strengthened ones are insufficient. However, the problem is not a lack of rules or faulty ones, but a lack of political will to enforce existing ones more forcefully. Creating new rules would be a bad move in my view, as it takes away focus and energy from applying what we have. The Audi does not need a new spoiler, but a driver as competent as my compatriot Max Verstappen. Thirdly, and more fundamentally, the EU, of whatever size, cannot deliver on any of its existing or potentially new objectives without rule of law protection. There is no sustainable EU market, competition policy, or environmental policy without independent judges. There is no stable justice cooperation without anti-corruption measures. However, it's not evident that the European Commission truly internalizes how crucial rule of law protection is. In its recent political guidelines for the new period, it only mentions this topic on page 23 of a 31-page document. So the only widening and deepening required is that of the Commission's understanding of the stakes involved to protect the rule of law. I'm coming to my second point. I'll be much briefer there. It is that we often talk about the rule of law as some sort of a container term, shorthand for all basic EU values. However, rule of law is just one value. Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union also includes others that have not been deeply explored, let alone applied. One of these is democracy. Related terms as democratic representation and democratic accountability are also mentioned in EU treaties. But what do these terms mean, and what consequences does that have? It's conventional in EU law that each term used must mean something, and something EU-specific. If the treaties say that citizens are democratically represented in the European Parliament, does that imply that an EU obligation that nationally organized European Parliament elections must be free and fair? Thus, wording that governments represented in the Council and the European Council need to be democratically accountable at home also means they must have been voted in line with EU standards. If so, what if international organizations like the OSCE have often found national elections were faulty, like in Hungary? Should we also introduce democracy conditionality, suspending EU funds when these targets are not met? That's what I want to explore as Enderlein Fellow. And whatever the findings, it will also have consequences for new members, because all those parts of EU law that are not yet fully understood will likely soon become a clearer part of the EU acquis that the new members have to incorporate. I'm concluding. EU enlargement is essential. We must try to integrate all European states into our community, which Henrik Enderlein rightly saw as one of the most important peace projects of our time. But the rule of law is foundational too. So enlargement and enforcement of the rule of law must go hand in hand. We cannot compromise on the value of all our foundational values, including those whose full meaning we are yet to discover. And we must enforce better the rules we already have, rather than adding new ones. Dank u zeer.
Great, thank you so much, John and Besa, for your very inspiring speeches. And let me very briefly welcome you, Franziska, to the Hertie School. You have been introduced already by Cornelia, so let me only say we're very happy to have you here tonight to discuss the topic of integrating new members, strengthening the rule of law in a growing EU. And we have heard the essence of the two fellowships already. One is enlargement and one is rule of law. Two topics, two issues that are fundamental for Europe, for the future of the European Union, and two topics that need to be thought together. And I think, John, you have said this quite well in your speech. So there is this new geopolitical necessity for enlargement. There's a new priority for enlargement, a new urgency. But at the same time, there is this need to still protect the values on which the European Union is founded, both in the current member states, in the enlargement process, and in a growing EU. So you said it is a sequence of questions or of reforms that we need to do, but it is perhaps also a sort of contradiction in the debate, because what we very often hear is, yes, enlargement is urgent, yes, enlargement is very important, but how can we enlarge if we cannot even secure our own values at 27? How can we do it at 30? How can we do it at 33? So I think we're not even at the sequencing part of the debate, but really at a point where enlargement is questioned based on the problems that we have in the current EU when it comes to enforcing the rule of law. And I think it is this interplay between rule of law and enlargement and the question of how to resolve this contradiction that we would like to discuss today. And Franziska, perhaps I give you the first words, because we have already heard from Besa and John, and perhaps I will simply keep the question very open. For now, how do you see this interplay between enlargement and the rule of law, and also the priority that is being put to both, and how do we combine it?
Yeah, thank you. And it's a pleasure being here. It's lovely being here with with you all. For also Henrik Enderlein, and allow me just to say two words, because we've been talking now a lot about economy, rule of law, and internal market and integration. And I think the great strength of Henrik was to always think it together, and to always see how it works together, and not to have these barriers in mind. Those people focus on rule of law and study this, and I'm the economist and I focus on the economy. But to have the capacity to see it, how it's intertwined and how we can save both. So I think it was interesting to listen to you. You said you don't know him. You have missed a big time. I think all of us who have been honored to know him do appreciate that there comes now a generation of people who gets this scholarship without knowing him, which for me is something I'm like, it's hard to imagine, but take the torch and carry it on, make it bright. On your question, in terms of, the question is for me is basically those who are challenging democracy and the factors challenging democracy in countries of the Western Balkans are the same challenging democracy in Germany, in Thuringia, in my home state, or in Hungary. So I think to believe that you can save democracy within the EU and that there are different root causes than in the Western Balkans, I think it's a false promise. So if we have one task to save liberal democracy, it's the same in Montenegro and in Germany. And the forces fighting it are the same. And I think if you go into that, the economy, you already lost the fight for liberal democracy. So that would be my first baseline, that these are the same challenges. And this is why I do disagree with you in terms of do we need new rules or not. I think we terribly need new rules, desperately new rules, if we want to protect our liberal democracy. Because if you look at we have always been fighting for media freedom, and we're fighting it 75 years, etc. It's a big, big thing. And it's important to keep the freedom of original press, of our newspapers, radio stations, etc. But people do not go to this classical media anymore. We have in Germany 20 million people on TikTok. Then you have all of the X, and you have Telegram, which is the largest communication channel in Germany. It goes beyond your cell phone network. So you have with TikTok the Communist Party of China. You have with Meta Elon Musk, and you have with Telegram a Russian person, not clear how his allegiance is to Russia and Putin. They're defining our discourse space. Can we survive as a liberal democracy in those circumstances? I really doubt it. Do we have the correct rules for that? None. We have started tiny, tiny bits. Do we need much more? Yes. In Serbia, in Montenegro, in Hungary, in Germany. So I think, if we really want to save democracy and rule of law, we need to really go at what are the root causes, why are these people strengthened, and do we have the real leverages and instruments to fight those root causes? And I don't think we have them. We can tinker a bit here on some justice reform, we can tinker a bit here, it won't make a difference. And that's why I think, we have to think it much larger, go much more into depth and be more courageous.
Thank you. John, let me give the question right back to you. Do we need new instruments, or are the ones sufficient? And I refer also back to your speech, because you said maybe it is a matter of enforcement and the Commission is not strong enough in enforcing it. But of course the Commission doesn't act by itself. It has member states that are increasingly less.
I just wanted to mention one thing before you go, because you were talking about North Macedonia and the Bulgaria issue now. The foreign minister who introduced that Bulgaria-Macedonia story, the Bulgarian foreign minister, she's now a candidate for commissioner in the portfolio. And because she's a woman, she's almost likely to get it. And she might get the regional development one. Also knowing her party background, it might not be a good idea. But if she gets a promotion for having made that fuss from Bulgaria about North Macedonia. It's about the worst signals you can send for enlargement. And we've been trying to make this point in Brussels. And I would hate it if just the fact that she's a woman leads her to get that job. So, you know, whoever is talking in Brussels, I think it would be seen as a terrible recompensation, as a terrible recognition, instead of saying, no, somebody who has been so destructive for European enlargement and for European procedures doesn't get to be European Commissioner, even if she's a woman.
Then perhaps let me pose two questions, one to John, one to Besa, on the remarks Franziska made. So John, the first one is on instruments to protect the rule of law and whether or not we need new ones. And also the question of, you said it is the Commission that is not enforcing the rule of law instruments as it should, but of course the Commission does not act entirely autonomously. And there is an increasing number of member states, or at least there are member states that are maybe less incentivized to support this Commission. So is that not also a reason to think about whether the instruments that we have are working or whether they need to be reformed? And also, is there a need for instruments to already include candidate countries in rule of law instruments? And I think the Commission President has suggested ideas in this direction. And Besa, to you, perhaps also starting from the remark that Franziska has made, how do you look at the new Commission in the next 5 years? So how positive, optimistic, or skeptical are you that this process will in fact remain a priority for the next Commission and will sort of continue or make progress also with regard to maybe the next budget? So will we see sort of progress in the different forms? And you mentioned gradual accession and perhaps accession to the single market. Is this something that you expect to happen in the next Commission mandate?
Thank you so much. I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to give you a legal answer. My apologies for that. According to the treaty, the Commission is independent as a guardian of the treaties. Research says that over the last 20 years that it has started infringement cases, which is a way for it to sue a member state in 80% less cases. So I agree with you that there's a political reality. I worked in Brussels for 4 years. But if you compare the situation of being both a government and an independent prosecutor, you can also think, for example, about the US situation where an independent arm of the Ministry of Justice went after Trump without that being green-lighted by the political top. So I think that what my argument was that we don't have a problem of instruments, we have a problem of political leadership in using them. I recently did a report for the European Parliament focusing on why is the Commission bringing less and less cases to actually sue member states, which is effective. In some of the areas that I studied, judicial independence, corruption, etc., even in countries that really went south very quickly, like Poland, it only brought 4 or 5, and much too late. If you bring a case as a commission, what you can do is bring a case basically tomorrow. Of course, it needs to have political backing, and you can immediately ask for what are called interim measures. So you can have the court tell you you need to freeze the situation on the ground. It only did this once, even with regard to Poland. So my overall argument is that, although of course I agree with Franziska that there's newer related areas like media, but the problem there is that the European Union does not have such strong competences. It can only regulate that from the viewpoint of the market. That's why it now has a European Free Media Act that is basically based on an internal market legal basis. But my intuition is that before you put the spoiler on the Audi, why don't you just hit the gas first as a commission and use this power that you have and that you have always defending in public that you are the guardian of the treaties. If you repeat over and over again that you find this so important, show it. And they did to some extent with regard to the budgetary conditionality in Poland and Hungary. I worked on that very closely. And I can tell you that that was very surprising, even to insiders, that the Commission reacted that quickly. So it can be done, but it needs political backing from the top. So what I meant to say really is that don't start thinking about new things before you've actually tried and fully seen the implications of trying harder what already exists. The second point that you're making to is indeed the Commission has now proposed to also include new member states, future member states in instruments like the annual rule of law report, which is an annual report in which the Commission gives recommendations to member states on how they can improve on judicial independence, media, other institutional issues. I think it's really important that, and a good move that these are included. Why? That new members are included, because it first of all, it radiates very much the fact of being part of the club. When I am in the Fundamental Rights Agency, there's also observer status already for future member states, and you can really see that helps them join the club, feel part of the family, get access to the information that is being shared, and that helps a lot, because in another capacity, at the moment I work with the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Zusammenarbeit, advising the Ukrainian government to hit rule of law and fundamental rights targets. It's actually very difficult to know what that target is. So therefore it's actually very useful for these members to sit on the table and get that information themselves.
Yeah, well, let's see who the next commissioner will be. It does make a difference. It's not decisive, but it does make a difference if the commissioner is friendly towards sort of the policy of enlargement or not. The rumor has it that it could be that the whole commission could be renamed into enlargement, sort of bringing back the old name. It's symbolic, but it does show sort of a new commitment to enlargement. But it is the member states still that at the end of the day would push for sort of a new enlargement wave or not. And in this case, I'm not sure if the appetite is there. Back in May, we had discussed sort of part of my research and enlargement, and we had an event here. And one of the questions that was asked is like, how do you expect sort of this political will to be mustered in the EU to move ahead on enlargement if you have countries like Bulgaria or Greece or that block the process? And my expectation is that if it is a priority, it would happen in the same way that compromises and negotiations happen among member states to get other difficult deals in place, like migration or the Green Deal. So yes, Bulgaria is an issue, but is there sort of lack of political will hiding behind concrete sort of Bulgarian action or Greek action or another country that could come up? There's this fear that bringing some of these countries that are candidates, bringing them in, it could create a new Hungary. But by keeping them out, you don't prevent a new Hungary. In fact, what has happened is there's a streak of authoritarianism now in the region, in the Western Balkans. Countries will develop slowly, but will look for money elsewhere and for models elsewhere, China being one example. So in this sense, I think having the rules for rule of law in place, keeping with a strict and fair sort of measurement of conditionality, bringing new rules in, of course, but not stopping the process, actually opening up the enlargement process to the Western Balkans by opening up accession negotiations with all countries on all chapters would be, I think, a first step for showing that the process does have credibility. And I really hope that the new Commission will push for something like that.
Thank you. So, Francis, is this on? Yes. So both John and Besa have mentioned political will, both when it comes to enforcing the rule of law, but also when moving forward the accession process. And perhaps also from a German perspective, a German government perspective, last year there seemed to have been this Franco-German consensus on enlargement, a lot of appetite, a lot of enthusiasm, and also because this is an event to commemorate Henrik Enderlein, who was, of course, also a big friend of the Franco-German relationship. How do you see the Franco-German push when it comes to protecting EU values, but also moving forward the enlargement process in the next years? Because we all know that it's perhaps a bit more problematic at the moment than a few years ago, but do you see potential for it?
I think one of the larger shifts was from Macron to move from a very enlargement skeptical point of view to one much more favorable and seeing the geopolitical implications. I think it becoming no longer an argument about agriculture, but an argument about geopolitical power, that helped a lot. And I think that is have we moved? Yes, we have also moved a bit. We're not talking today about the EPC, the political community, but that was, of course, a bit a trade-off to say, okay, we also do a bit of your idea, but we also do enlargement. And in a way, I think it's good that the leaders meet and talk. There are a few formats where they actually really all meet, and you have the Brits, and you have the Norwegians, and you have the Western Balkan people. There is a value in this meeting. It's not a formal one, I would say, like the agreements or whatever comes out is, it's not moving the world, but sometimes the informal opportunity to really be there in one room, and also for people to be in one room, which usually don't like to be at one meeting, is helpful. So in a way, I think that was a good alignment of forces, which both made sense. And we rarely talk about it because nobody really cares a lot about it. So I think in a way, when you look at the big debates about between Germany and France previously, be it enlargement, be it industrial policy. Germany has moved on industrial policy, France has moved on enlargement. So on two difficult blocks, industrial policy, not just in the economic area, but also, for example, on defense. I think Germany has moved there a lot towards France, and France has moved a lot towards Germany on enlargement. Which is helpful, I think, on both ways. When you were talking about political will, you were saying it was a bit of a surprise that the Commission actually enforced that. We were part of pushing for that. I negotiated that bit in the coalition treaty where we wrote it down. So I still remember every single word was fought over, hardly. But I knew exactly which word would make what impact in Brussels. And that was fun when you can do this, and then when you have to follow up on it. But of course, there are many cases where the Commission could intervene. We just had this morning another round. German companies have been very molested in Hungary, but others get the red carpet. And that's what Hungary is doing very successfully and very skillfully. From my constituencies, Heidelberg, the Heidelberg materials, they're basically out. They've really lost money, and not just market share. You have Spar from Austria. You have many others, the airports, etc. So there has been basically very dramatic discrimination and disrespect of internal market rules, which easily could be dealt with by the Commission, not even on the basis of rule of law, but just pure internal market rules which have been violated. You don't even have to go anywhere close to rule of law, just very pure, basic internal market. So we have just, 2 weeks ago, we wrote again to the Commission and saying, please, do something about this. And we didn't write it as the Foreign Ministry, but as the Economy Ministry, because we really consider it to be a pure internal market, terrible discrimination, disrespect of EU law by Hungary. So, we'll see what the next Commission will do out of it, but we put all the cases, we put all of this to the Commission and said, please do start a procedure. And not based on the rule of law articles, but on the internal market. And I think it will be interesting to see how the Commission reacts to that, if they say, oh, it's also too hot. But that will be, I think, interesting for us to see if there's more appetite to do this. And there's also a lot of economic, I would say, sorrow behind it. And I think that is something that could also help to create political support.
I want to add just one footnote. When I was working in Brussels, and one of my former colleagues sitting there, Roy, and this is going to be very surprising for you, for somebody from the Netherlands telling you this in Germany. I'm always surprised by the fact that Germany does not seem to understand here how important they are in Brussels and what an incredible power their leadership has, and sometimes that some of the things that they're doing could actually be packaged in a way that show real leadership. I'll give you 2 examples. I was in Luxembourg during the court hearing in the European Court of Justice, which was about this conditionality mechanism that you helped put in place, of course, was challenged by Hungary and Poland. And both France and Germany intervened on the side of the institutions to defend that. That was such a powerful sign, and you could really see it made a big difference that it was Germany speaking up there and it was France speaking up there. And this is gonna, if you wanna portray political leadership, this is gonna be possible very soon. Recently the Commission sued Hungary over a new law called the Child Protection Law, which is basically associating LGBTI sexual orientation with pedophilia. There's a lot of countries that are helping the Commission defend that case, almost 17, which is a record. And it will again be Germany and France. It would be so powerful, rather than only let the lawyers do the talking in Luxembourg, to have politicians do the talking and give a joint press conference before what's happening in court. So political will is also seeing opportunities for what is actually important to communicate about, in my view.
John, I do hope your plea will be heard here in Berlin about taking leadership. I think we are slightly behind schedule, so I would like to open up the floor for questions from the audience. And I already see in the back, Raphael. I think you will get a microphone, hopefully.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the floor. Raphael Boston, German Institute for International Security Affairs. I have maybe a few more slightly technical questions. So to start with, and pick what you want, start with the kind of link single market and rule of law. And I know this is a debate that has been going on behind the scene. It's also mentioned in the policy guidelines from von der Leyen. And I just don't quite get yet how this is best played. So you just said, Ms. Brantner, that you're making the case this should be just handled under single market rules. Or if I correctly understood it, maybe I misunderstood.
You misunderstood.
Okay, maybe then just give me a little bit more elaboration that, you know, in my understanding, it was not just, okay, Commission could go in with competition law powers, but that this would be an argument for also selling more broadly that rule of law has to be prioritized versus other interests that maybe also always, you know, compete for, you know, in the European realm. So if you really can show this is the damage it does, this is why you also have to prioritize this dossier. But maybe I'm also didn't quite see the full picture. And just the point on the link to the media space. I mean, I think this is very well taken. Again, also we have heard this announcement that there should be a democracy defense shield, whatever that means. But of course, it's also the question of implementation. We don't know yet what with the European Media Freedom Act happening. I just wonder, though, that you know there is a different trade-off also. I mean, all this needs to be done. I have no problem there, but the reverse risk I could see, hypothetical, that you know we see this question, for example, with the criteria for cooperation with the European Conservative and Reformists. So we have this criteria: pro-Western, pro-Ukraine, pro-rule of law. All right, and so let's see how this plays out over the period of the next 4 years. But if we focus very much on the media space, and it is also a problem in Italy and so on, no question, but if we very much focus on the defense of foreign interference, could it be, I think there is a risk that that we say any country that takes action against whatever, some Russian operation and so on and so forth, that's enough to show the credibility of rule of law credentials. I can just see this risk there, that we all kind of get behind that banner, and that everything else becomes a little bit secondary, and really that we really play that up a bit too much. Maybe this is very hypothetical, but you know, this is the easier win, I would think, than just trying to kind of stick to the guns and that what was said before, really implementing the instruments we have.
Oh, there's a lot more questions. Perhaps Christina? Here.
Thank you very much. A question to John about the European Commission. So I think we've been looking at the European Parliament for decades and how the European Parliament dealt with far-right political parties. Yet again, before the 2024 elections, that was one of the key questions we looked at. We've also started looking at right-wing governments or far-right governments in several European member states. However, I think the incoming Commission is probably the first one where you really have a number of commissioners coming from or nominated by far-right governments. So how do you reconcile, in a way, the legal technical role of the European Commission as guardian of the treaties with far-right governments potentially intervening with what the Commission does? I think this is something that's not been looked at either in scholarship, but also in practice. It's usually Commission as guardian of the treaties or politicized Commission. I would be interested in seeing perhaps the more political side of your argument.
Maybe we take a third question, just next. Yeah, Başak, and then we do one round of answers and then a second round of questions.
Thank you. I'm Başak Çalı. I'm the director for the Center for Fundamental Rights. A really warm welcome to the Center for you, John. And it's, as a colleague of Henrik, it's just wonderful to hear about Henrik. And thanks for everyone's also very personal and touching remarks. A wonderful colleague and a friend for me as well. My question comes back to the rule of law again, I'm afraid, and an area that we're also very interested in. And the question is to you, I think, but of course, please welcome to answer it for the other speakers. I'm also a little bit worried about not sort of whether the EU has the rules and whether, you know, that we have an enforcement problem with the infringement proceedings and the Commission, but what about this genuine risk that actually the EU is working against rule of law protections itself? So the recent EU rule of law report, some have criticized it being very lax and quite random in its assessments of what's good and what's bad and things like that. So I just want you to turn back and look at it the other way, of this dangerous corrupting effects of the EU itself for the protection of rule of law and what it means for enlargement and you know, the cynical engagement of those waiting on the other side of the border to enter into the EU. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we had 3 questions on the rule of law, one relating to the single market and media freedom for Franziska, and 2 for John, one relating to the composition of the Commission, and the other one whether or not the Commission actually works for the rule of law.
Just to clarify, and maybe I was not clear enough, I just said that, you know, usually the rule of law issues are dealt with the foreign ministry communicating to Brussels, and this one is we do it as an economy ministry because it's the internal market rules. This doesn't mean that the others shouldn't do the rule of law part. I just said it will be interesting to see how the Commission will react, because it's not coming under the banner of rule of law, but de facto, of course, it is also in a way a rule of law question, but it's really a, you know, internal market question which has been dealt with by the Commission. Usually they do it towards member states. They've done it more in the past. They do it regularly towards Germany, you know, so it should be a bit less politicized, but we'll see. You know, is it easier, entre guillemets, to fight Russian interference than to change it? You know, again, I think it will not be possible to keep our democracies if we don't tackle this issue well. So it's not an either or. I'm like, if you think, you know, we do this a bit and then we don't do this because it's easier or more difficult, I think it will just be not successful. And it's not just Russia, it's many others. And, you know, Elon Musk is not Russian. But I think, you know, X has become quite toxic. And it's good that the Commission is having its examination under the DSA. And I hope there will be many more coming, and it will be very thorough. And then we will see what is still lacking. For example, in the DSA, you have reporting requirements for our security agencies, for like our police and Landeskriminalämter. It's not mandatory to report if, for example, Telegram doesn't cooperate on the grounds of accusations on Volksverhetzung, because you don't have this in in all EU member states. I don't even know how you say that in English, Volksverhetzung. It's, anybody can help me?
Incitement?
No, it's not hate speech, really. It's Volksverhetzung. It's something more general.
Incitement?
Yeah, I think a bit in this direction. So, you know, and usually you report what you have to report because you're too busy to do other stuff. And we have on a lot of Straftaten on criminal grounds that we have in Germany, which are not part of the DSA. So the question is, how do we deal with that, for example? So there's a lot that I think we still need to clarify, need to add to laws, etc. And this is not, again, an either-or question. And I just think that if we, and it shouldn't be and will not be an excuse for the rest, but if we do no longer have a public support for democracy and the rule of law, how do you expect, and that goes to your question, like if you have all the commissioners being happy to destroy the rule of law, how do you expect the commission to implement the rule of law? And this is a question of the majorities in member states, which is a lot linked to public debates. And that's why I say, you know, this is where I think we very fast need much tougher implementation of existing rules, but also additional rules, because I don't think we have, you know, years and years of time. And again, it's a marathon that we are in. Like, if in 10 years' time we still live in a democracy in Germany, we did something right. But it's a marathon. But we need to see that, you know, our shoes are not the right ones we are wearing for this marathon.
Yeah, so discussions about the rule of law always become terribly depressing immediately. So I want to push back against that framing a little bit. I want to go through each of the three questions were put very briefly. Everything starts with the right analysis. So in the political guidelines of the Commission, this whole idea of democracy shield is based on the threat comes from outside and it's digital in nature. That's the wrong analysis. The threat comes from inside and is not digital in nature. The nature of the threat is, of course, the digital can help in spreading false ideas, but the problem is the ideas. Why are they falling in fertile ground? So everything starts with the right analysis, and I'm not confident that the right analysis is currently existing in the Commission, at least from its political guidelines, which brings me to Christina, who, by the way, was my roommate in Florence. She asked a very important question. Why you're
so transparent about it.
Exactly, yeah. Full disclosure, yeah. So basically you're asking me, why, John, are you so confident in the Commission if they're basically being polluted themselves? But that is a problem that is actually much wider, because it's also happening in the Council and the European Parliament. It's called the authoritarian equilibrium, as my colleague Dan Kellerman said. So part of the problem why it's perhaps not the right thing to expect too much from the European Union is because it's being polluted from the inside in all the different institutions, not only the Commission. And that leads me to Bachak's question, maybe to suboptimal products as well. This annual rule of law report that you're mentioning is in fact a joke. It's a sort of a political whitewashing exercise that is not, first of all, it compares democracies with non-democracies, and second, it doesn't really come up with actionable ideas. So why am I still optimistic? Because I think there's plenty of people in this room who feel as angry about this as I am. So it's up to us. It's not only waiting for others to take action. So one of the things I like, for example, at Hertie is that you have a policy lab. So one of the things that would be really interesting to do is create an annual rule of law report here at Hertie. Why don't we just brainstorm with students here and say, well, this is actually what the real situation is, and bring that into the public debate. So I think there's a lot of things to do, but you have to start from the right analysis.
Since we started late, I think we can take two more very, very brief questions. Goran in the back.
Now, Goran from Senior Fellow here at Hertie. My question is for Franziska Brantner. You talked about the red carpet. There was a red carpet as back as in September 2022 for Orban by the companies here. And I don't want to speak negatively about German companies, but can they do something positively now in Slovakia? So basically to go ahead of the curve rather than wait the red carpet to be rolled back for them. So I'm just asking because actually we from the civil society people, from the academia, everybody sort of says like, oh, it's coming to you, trust me. And now it's 5 years later. So instead of Hungary, which is now gone, can one think more proactively and get Ost-Ausschluss and the other partners to work proactively in Slovakia? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mirko Đuković. I'm a postdoc researcher at the Center for Fundamental Rights. I'm from Montenegro originally, a love child of German and French love affair about enlargement. While I agree with everything that Besa shared on the facts, I disagree with the conclusions that she made because I worked for the EU in Montenegro and I was the one writing about progress reports. So I was a traitor to the interests of the governing structures. So my question is more about how the rule of law, as we are perceiving it here and within the EU, supports the stabilitocracies in Western Balkans. So I think one of the major components that we forget, yes, geopolitical agenda is important in the enlargement. However, I think we are forgetting political economy. So basically the political economy of rule of law is something that I think we should discuss more. The example is Serbia and the lithium, and now Scholz going there, and he's having the treat of supporting Vucic's autocracy, stabilitocracy, which we had in Montenegro with Đukanović. Now Đukanović is gone, and so on and so on. So my question is for any of you who wants to address the political economy aspect of rule of law, which I think we are not talking about at all.
Thank you. So one last round for the speakers. Would you like to start, Besa?
Sure. Thank you for bringing that up. I had it on my notes and then I kicked it out. I was like, it's too much. No, but look, the argument that I'm making is this. If countries are out, you can have different relationships with these countries that are not on sort of equal rules. You can't enforce rules in the same way. So Serbia now having this favorable relationship, but being outside and still not aligning with the foreign policy of the EU on Russia, still playing a destructive role in the region, both Bosnia and Kosovo and Montenegro. And they can continue this because they're not on a credible EU track. But if all the countries would be on a credible EU track, then you can have, I think, less sort of movement if you get other, like the example that you mentioned where you have lithium there, that relationship can continue, but they would still have to abide by the same rules in the same way like all of the countries in the region. And this is the argument that I'm making. So yes, I agree with you, but if there would be a credible process, I think Serbia could have been more in the sort of hug of the EU and following the rules in a way that it would be more in line with the values that the EU is pushing forward in the region and elsewhere.
Thank you for the hint on Slovakia. We have been working on this already. On Hungary, I can't go into much detail, but I have had many sessions with the Ostausschuss to get them to write letters to the Commission as Ostausschuss, which, I think was not their favorite in the beginning, maybe. But it also makes a difference. That's why I said you have now companies backing it, and you can say it's too late. Already this was a lot of work, but happy, yes, to take it. But we are working on Slovakia on this. And I agree, it's very interesting, for example, to see in Hungary, it is the largest, it will be the largest site of production of BYD. And it used to be the big, the car industry used to defend Orban because they had the red carpet. And it's of course interesting to see that now Orban said, okay, my future when it comes to automotive sector is BYD and the Chinese companies. And that changes the dynamics. But at the same time, Hungary is becoming a large defense construction site now for German companies like Rheinmetall. You know, so you're a bit moving there. So it's very interesting how the economic dynamics between Germany and Hungary shift, with China coming in as a big actor. By the way, in the entire region, as you just said, it's not just Hungary, Croatia, Montenegro. It's quite interesting to see. And I was expecting that Serbia lithium question. I was like, it hasn't come up in the introduction. Where's the question? No, so look at it. It's let me say first, I know that there are rumors in terms of there's a discount for the rule of law because of the lithium. And like, that's really wrong. And I can only state it like a gazillion times that this is wrong. But about the project itself, the first attempt by Rio Tinto to do this project was terrible. Like, it was right to protest against it, and it was right that that Vucic stopped it. I'm like, he stopped it because of the protest. He took away their license, which stopped it de facto. And we made very clear that, you know, if we support it, it has to be a very different project. And Rio Tinto has been working now, and I think it could be a big chance because the EU agreement with Serbia, it's not Germany-EU, it's also always in the Serbian press it says German agreement. I'm like, there's no German agreement. But the Chancellor was there, yes, but there was also the Commissioner there, whatever. So the EU-Serbia agreement, it has to open the chance, because Rio Tinto said, we commit to EU law, even if it's not yet legally mandatory in Serbia. And then the Serbian side said, okay, then we bring that entire environmental legal part to Serbia earlier, which it's refusing to do under the accession process so far. So if we use it well, we could use it for strengthening the implementation mechanisms and the legal situation. And that's part of what is in the agreement between Serbia and the EU, is to have that, moving that part of the legal implementation earlier so that they have to do it, and also to monitor it and strengthen those institutions. So it could be, if we do it well, I don't say it necessarily has to go well, but there is this potential in there which I think one should not underestimate. And of course, one also doesn't have to be naive about it, that this lithium will be used. And the question is if it will be better for Serbia and Serbian democracy, if it will be BYD or if it's Mercedes. And I think, you know, these are tough choices in the end. And I have, you know, we have, if you read the reports about the Chinese mines in Serbia, it's a nightmare when it comes to nature and environment. And there are no protests. So sometimes I'm always like, okay, it's interesting to see where you have the protests. And I think that if we do it well, it could be a proof that we actually link it well. Is that safe? Will it certainly come? So no, we can just say that the EU is committed to monitor it. We are committed to monitor. We will send, there's always EU expertise in there now. So all of these licensing they did with EBRD experts, so not just Serbian experts. So I think it brings in expertise, monitoring capacity from European institutions into a process and a project which would otherwise be only under Serbian institutions. And I don't know if that would be, I'm like, in the end, that's a Serbian choice, huh? I'm like, it's not mine as Germans. But that's what we can offer. So say you have that, make it a joint project with European actors, with European law, European support and institutions. And it will also bring more added value in the supply chain, which is another issue. But I think, you know, that is an offer. And yes, it was also made by the German Chancellor. But Serbian people in the end will decide if they prefer to, you know, push it out. But I think it would be wrong to believe that then Vucic says, okay, I leave that lithium in the earth. And I think, you know, these are the difficult choices. And all we could do as a Ministry of Economy was to bring the best expertise, to technique, and to make it sure that it's at the best environmental standards we have, the best technology, and to also have new. That was, by the way, if I may say so, that was my part. I always said, like Rio Tinto, you have to have a civil society advisory council for that project. And they said, oh no, but this is, oh, you green, you with your civil society. I was like, yeah, you need to have such a council for the project, otherwise you will never ever see me there. And they were like, oh no. And then the third time I went back, I was like, you need to have a civil society advisory council for the entire permanent time of the project. Oh, but this is not legally necessary in Serbia. I was like, I know, I'm totally aware, you're not legally obliged to have it. But politically, if you want to get any of our support, you have to do it. And then they committed to do it. And I think, this is where we link civil society, democracy to the economic side of saying, okay, you do that project. You're not obliged in Serbia to do such a consultation. But if you want to get our economic support, you have to involve civil society. And again, this is part of the offer. Serbians will in the end decide if they prefer to go down this route or another one.
Yeah, maybe again to end on a high. Political economy works both ways. The only thing that ever caused traction with regard to rule of law in the European Union was when DG Budget took charge rather than DG Justice, because rather than high-talking value warriors, it was accountants with very thick glasses who just said, this problem is so big that we will cut your funds. And I also think, and that's sort of a call to all of us here, we have to just become more creative in explaining what we think is valuable. I was in a talk show in the Netherlands talking about some recent development in Poland. Clearly the anchor in the pre-talk had no idea why this was on her show in the first place. And said, well, can you just explain why this is useful for the Netherlands? So I gave the following example. Tomorrow I'll stop being a professor and I start exporting flowers to Poland. It becomes a booming business. All of a sudden I'm a problem to some friends of the government in Warsaw in the flower business. And since there's no longer an independent judge there, this is a threat to my investment. So this is the way that I explained it. The next day I had 4 different phone calls from business associations to explain the situation in Poland to them. So you also have to be, political economy is also something you can weaponize. That's what I want to say. So we have to become more creative as well in defending what we're believing in.
Yeah. I very much agree. That's why I think it's so important that we bring it as Ministry of Economy, these cases, because it's about business, about money, it's about future. But I just wanted to say, because I started off by linking democracy there and here and media, and it's been very interesting to be part of or being attacked from Serbian fake news, because in Serbia it circulates that we all do this because we don't want to touch the lithium in Germany. And it couldn't be more false. Those who follow German news have seen that I've been setting up a raw material fund. We sponsor the lithium projects in the Rhine Valley. I do all of this work with Saxony and the Czech Republic on the lithium reserve that is on German and Czech territory. I've spent like so much time on getting the German lithium out of the territory. But it sticks in the Serbian social media and part of the press that Ms. Brantner is doing all of this because she's a green and doesn't want to touch her own country and just want to touch Serbia. And it's insane. I can give interviews, I can do whatever I want, and it spills back into Germany. And I see the conservatives attacking me and saying, you know, look who you're working with, and you all do this because you green don't want to touch your lithium. And I'm like, this is, you know, this is going once via Serbia, coming back from a totally different angle. And it's interesting to see how the two communication spheres do interlink here over fake news. But it doesn't make my life much easier. And it's the same challenge when it comes to China. The licenses for the lithium in Saxony belong to a company called Zinnwald GmbH, very German, lovely. So then you go and like, who is behind that company? Oh, a listed company on the London Stock Exchange market. And then you're like, oh, okay, who are the owners? Until recently, the largest, shareholder was a Chinese lithium company who bought it years ago. So, Chinese strategic thinking, lithium, like e-cars, batteries, lithium. Where's lithium? In Saxony, in the Erzgebirge. Oh, we get the licenses. They got them, 10 years ago, I think. I'm not sure exactly if it's 10, 11 or something, but long, when I was starting to talk about e-cars in Germany, and people were like, oh my God, this green crazy person talking about e-cars. The Chinese were getting the lithium in Erzgebirge. So, I think one should just not underestimate what the real choices are for Serbians, for Germans, for French. And that, we just have to be a bit smarter.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very insightful discussion on enlargement and the rule of law. I think it was very great. Thank you, Franziska, for joining us. Thank you, Besa, for having been with us the last year. And John, we're very much looking forward to working with you in the next. And of course, thank you all for being here and joining us also on, as Cornelia said, the eve of Henrik's 50th birthday tomorrow. And I think with this, we will close the event. There are some drinks outside. And we look forward to mingling there with you.